Most people prefer to believe that female infidelity is just a matter of momentary desire, an emotional impulse, or a lack of character. That explanation is comfortable, simple, and, above all, false. It's comfortable because it sidesteps a more inconvenient truth. Infidelity is rarely born in the moment of the betrayal itself. It starts way before that, in silence, inside the mind. And when it finally manifests, it's just the final consequence of a long, rationalized, and often strategically justified psychological process. Machiavelli would never analyze this phenomenon through the moralistic lens that most folks adopt. He wouldn't ask if it's right or wrong. He'd ask something more dangerous. Why does it happen, and who benefits? Because, to a strategic mind, human behaviors don't just pop up out of nowhere. They are adaptive responses to environments, incentives, and power structures. Female infidelity, specifically, is often misunderstood because too many insist on seeing it as an emotional version of male cheating, as if it were just neediness, starved for attention, or some unresolved romance. This flawed reading ignores something fundamental. Women rarely cheat on brute impulse. When they cheat, they've already gone through a long internal process of justification. A silent, logical process, often invisible even to the guy sleeping next to them. There is a recurring pattern that almost no one notices. Before the physical betrayal, there's a psychological betrayal, an internal shift of loyalty. The woman starts rewriting the relationship's history inside her own head. Little narrative tweaks start popping up. I'm putting in way more than I'm getting back. I've suppressed myself for too long. I deserve to be happy. I'm not doing anything wrong, I'm just being me. These aren't emotional phrases, they are rational. They function as internal authorizations. Machiavelli would understand this as a classic mechanism for preserving personal power. When someone feels they've lost value, influence, or recognition within a structure, whether it's a relationship, a family, or a social standing, that person will look to restore that power elsewhere. Not out of malice, but out of strategic instinct. Humans rarely accept staying in a position where they feel diminished for too long. This is where many get it wrong, thinking infidelity is just about sexual desire. In most cases, desire is secondary. What drives the decision is the recovery of identity, validation, and control. Cheating in this context isn't viewed internally as betrayal. It's viewed as correcting a perceived injustice. And that changes everything. Another point Machiavelli would never ignore is the cultural environment. We live in an era that incentivizes constant validation, keeping up with the Joneses, and the idea that happiness is an immediate right. Social media, misunderstood therapy speak, and modern narratives reinforce the notion that any emotional discomfort is a sign that something is wrong, and must be fixed, fast. This scenario creates the perfect breeding ground for rationalizing infidelity. When a woman starts feeling invisible, underestimated, or emotionally displaced, modern culture doesn't teach her to confront, reorganize, or take strategic responsibility for her position. It teaches her something more dangerous, to look outside, not as an escape hatch, but as authenticity, not as a breakup, but as self-care. The language changes, but the mechanism is the same. Machiavelli would warn that every time a society teaches its members to prioritize feelings over structures, it creates instability. Relationships stop being strategic alliances and turn into fragile emotional arenas, where any internal fluctuation can justify an external rupture. In this scenario, infidelity isn't an accident, it's a predictable consequence. There is also a detail rarely said out loud. Many women don't see themselves as active agents of betrayal, but as reactors to a context. They don't say, "I chose this." They say, "It just happened." This narrative protects their self-image, preserves the sensation of virtue, and reduces the weight of responsibility. From a Machiavellian point of view, this isn't naivety, it's psychological self-preservation. Understanding this isn't justifying it, it's comprehending it. And comprehending is always more dangerous than condemning, because it strips away illusions. Female infidelity, when observed without moralism, reveals less about desire and more about power, identity, and internal narrative. Those who ignore these factors will continue to be surprised. Those who understand them will never be caught off guard. And this is exactly where most people fail. They believe fidelity is maintained with promises, when in reality, it's sustained by perceived value, clear standing, and a silent balance of power. Machiavelli knew the score. Alliances don't break just because of outside attraction, but when they stop making sense internally. To understand the phenomenon on a deeper level, you have to ditch the romantic idea that relationships are sustained on feelings alone. Machiavelli would never make that mistake. For him, every lasting relationship is, first and foremost, a structure. A silent organization of expectations, exchanges, positions, and symbolic power. When that structure starts to fail, the bond doesn't snap immediately. It rots from the inside out. What many interpret as a sudden change in a woman who cheats is actually the final stage of a process that started way back. The most common mistake is looking only at external behavior and ignoring the real battlefield, the mind. Before any other man enters the picture, a strategic internal reevaluation happens. The woman starts analyzing, even subconsciously, the emotional cost-benefit of staying where she is. At this point, psychology kicks in precisely. When a person feels they are investing more than they're receiving, the brain seeks re-equilibrium. This doesn't happen explosively, but gradually. Small, unresolved frustrations start piling up. Conversations avoided, expectations adjusted downward, admiration reduced. All of this erodes the invisible foundation of the relationship. And when that base weakens, loyalty stops being automatic. Machiavelli would say that no one remains faithful to a structure that doesn't offer sufficient symbolic return. Fidelity isn't just a moral commitment, it's also a perception of advantage. When that advantage disappears, humans look for alternatives. First mentally, then emotionally, and only then physically. This is where one of the most dangerous mechanisms emerges: emotional dissociation. The woman is still physically present in the relationship, but emotionally she's already checked out. She still plays the roles, keeps the routines, preserves the appearance of normalcy. On the outside, everything looks intact. On the inside, the alliance has already been weakened. This state creates fertile ground for external connections because emotional involvement starts being perceived as harmless. Another crucial factor is the inversion of responsibility. As dissatisfaction grows, the internal narrative shifts. The partner stops being seen as an ally and starts being interpreted as an obstacle. Internal phrases like, "if he were different," "if he understood me," "if he valued me" become recurring. This rewriting of history is essential for the betrayal to become psychologically acceptable. From a Machiavellian standpoint, this is extremely revealing. The human mind needs to feel fair to itself. Few people can act against their own values without first altering how they interpret reality. Infidelity, therefore, doesn't start with desire, but with justification. When the justification is solid, desire finds permission. There is also the element of external recognition. When a woman feels emotionally invisible within her own relationship, any form of attention outside of it gains disproportionate weight. A simple compliment can feel profound. Casual interest can feel like a true connection. Not because it is, but because the internal soil was already dry. Machiavelli would observe that when a system fails to nourish its members, they will seek sustenance elsewhere. Important note: this doesn't just happen in conflicted relationships. Many affairs spring up in seemingly stable relationships. The problem isn't open conflict, but silent stagnation. When there is no tension, growth, or repositioning, a sense of irrelevance sets in. And nothing is more dangerous to the human bond than the perception of being easily replaceable. Psychology shows that the brain reacts to external validation with powerful chemical discharges: dopamine, oxytocin, the thrill of novelty. These stimuli create an illusion of emotional rebirth. But to Machiavelli, this wouldn't be seen as passion. It would be seen as a repositioning of power. The woman goes back to feeling desired, seen, central. She recovers something she believes she lost. And when that sensation returns, the old structure starts to look even more limited. Comparisons arise. The current partner is measured not by what he was, but by what he ceased to be. This is a critical point. Loyalty has already been replaced by constant evaluation. From there, the rupture isn't a question of if, but when. None of this happens by chance. The mistake lies in believing that fidelity sustains itself on declared love alone. Machiavelli would teach that alliances last when there is a balance between perceived value, recognition, and a clear position. When that balance is lost, the mind starts planning exits, even if the body hasn't taken the first step yet. There is a common error in analyzing female infidelity merely as an emotional phenomenon. This reading ignores something fundamental. The body is an active player in this process, not as a villain but as an instrument. The mind rationalizes, the body responds, and both work together to push the decision forward. Machiavelli would never separate psychology from physiology. For him, the human being is an integrated system, and any internal change leaves physical marks before it ever becomes visible in behavior. When a woman spends long periods feeling unresolved emotional frustration, the body enters a state of chronic alert. Constant tension, fragmented sleep, irritability, fatigue with no apparent cause. The nervous system starts operating off balance. This state isn't neutral. It alters how external stimuli are perceived. What once seemed trivial starts to be interpreted as significant. What was just a conversation turns into a connection. What was just attention turns into desire. Psychology calls this emotional deprivation. When basic emotional needs, recognition, symbolic security, belonging aren't met, the brain seeks compensation, not out of weakness but out of survival. Machiavelli would understand this as an adaptive response. The organism seeks to re-establish balance where it was lost. Another silent mechanism kicks in at this point: hyper-justification. The mind starts producing elaborate explanations for feelings that haven't yet been translated into acts. I'm not cheating, just talking. It's nothing physical. I deserve to feel something again. These phrases aren't innocent. They function as psychological bridges between intention and action. The more they are repeated, the more natural the transition becomes. The body responds to these microtransgressions with chemical rewards: dopamine associated with novelty, oxytocin linked to the sensation of connection. The brain interprets this as relief, a relief that contrasts sharply with the emotional monotony already installed in the original relationship. And here is the danger. The brain doesn't evaluate morality. It evaluates contrast. Where there is more positive stimulus, it leans. Machiavelli would observe that when pleasure starts to associate itself with an external source, the old alliance automatically loses strength. It's not a conscious decision. It's a gradual displacement of internal loyalty. The body starts anticipating external contact. Mood improves upon receiving messages. Tension temporarily decreases. These physical signals reinforce the mental narrative that something there does me good. And what feels good starts to seem legitimate. There is also the factor of bodily identity. Many women associate personal value with the perception of being desired. When that perception weakens within the relationship, the body reacts as if it's losing territory. Posture changes, energy drops. External contact, on the other hand, restores that sense of presence. The body expands again. The woman feels alive, visible, taking up space. Machiavelli would call this a recovery of position. It is important to understand that at this stage, the decision is still not seen as betrayal. It is seen as self-correction. The brain creates an artificial separation between emotion and commitment. I still fulfill my role. I haven't done anything wrong. This internal division allows the behavior to advance without generating immediate moral conflict. And the longer this division is maintained, the harder it becomes to reverse it. Another aspect rarely discussed is the physiological wear and tear of emotional containment. Keeping desires repressed, frustrations unexpressed, and dissatisfaction silent requires energy. Over time, this containment becomes exhausting. The body looks for a release valve. The external connection appears as that valve. Not just emotionally, but physically. The relief felt isn't imaginary. It is real. And that is exactly what makes the process so dangerous. Machiavelli would understand that no system survives when it demands more containment than it offers in reward. Relationships are no exception. When the internal cost of remaining faithful becomes too high, the mind starts looking for strategic justifications to redistribute that cost. Infidelity at this point stops being an isolated moral failure and becomes the final expression of a mismanaged system. Ignoring the body's role in this process is to continue believing that human decisions are purely rational or purely emotional. They aren't. They are integrated responses to continuous stimuli, and when those stimuli favor rupture, behavior just follows the path that was paved long before the first conscious choice. When this process advances without interruption, what is lost isn't just fidelity to the other person, but the woman's own internal stability. And this is a point almost no one addresses honestly. Infidelity doesn't just charge a price from the betrayed relationship. It charges, silently, from the body, the mind, and the perception of self over time. Machiavelli would never analyze only the immediate gain. He would always ask, what is the hidden cost of this decision? In the short term, the external connection seems restorative. There is energy, a sense of control, renewed enthusiasm. But this state cannot be sustained without consequences. The mind starts living in duplicity. Two parallel narratives coexist: the external image of normalcy and the fragmented internal life. Maintaining this division requires constant vigilance. The body wasn't designed to sustain incoherence for long periods without paying a price. The first cost appears in the nervous system. The need to hide, lie, or omit activates continuous stress responses. Even when the woman believes she is in control, the body knows something is misaligned. Cortisol production spikes, sleep becomes irregular, little symptoms start popping up: diffuse aches, irritability, energy crashes, lapses in concentration. None of this is immediately associated with the infidelity, but the link exists. Over time, a second effect emerges: the erosion of identity. To sustain the internal narrative that justifies the betrayal, the woman must constantly reconfigure her own values. What was once unacceptable becomes relative. What once defined who she was becomes negotiable. This moral flexibility might seem liberating at first, but it charges a high price: the loss of a stable internal reference point. Machiavelli knew that individuals without an internal axis become vulnerable. When identity fragments, the person starts depending more and more on external validation to orient themselves. This creates a dangerous cycle. The more the woman leans on recognition from the outside, the more fragile she becomes on the inside. The body follows this fragility. Posture changes, tension sets in, the sense of security diminishes, even when momentary pleasure increases. There is also the impact of time. Decisions that seem small when taken at 30 or 40 accumulate effects by 50 or 60. Emotional duplicity doesn't disappear without leaving marks. Broken relationships, lost trust, repeated patterns. Many women who cheat don't do it just once. The behavior becomes a recurring strategy for emotional regulation, and repeated strategies shape destinies. Another invisible cost is the normalization of instability. When infidelity becomes an acceptable response to frustration, the mind learns that breakups are quick fixes. This weakens the capacity to sustain discomfort, negotiate boundaries, and rebuild alliances. In the long run, this logic affects all areas of life: work, friendships, family. The body once again responds with chronic wear. Machiavelli would warn that those who live reacting lose the capacity to govern. The woman who gets used to looking outside for what's missing inside ends up held hostage by circumstances and the people who offer the stimulus. Power, which seemed recovered in the beginning, slowly drains into the hands of whoever controls the validation. Pleasure transforms into subtle dependency. There is also the factor of late regret. Not immediate moral regret, but the kind that surfaces years later, when the body no longer responds the same way, when options dwindle and when consequences become irreversible. At this stage, many realize they didn't just cheat on a partner, but on future versions of themselves. Machiavelli would understand this as a strategic failure. immediate gain in exchange for structural loss. None of this means that infidelity is always the result of malice. Often, it is born from a lack of awareness about these hidden costs. But ignoring the price doesn't eliminate it. The body keeps the score. The mind files it away. Time collects. Relationships can end and restart, but internal coherence, once broken repeatedly, requires enormous effort to be rebuilt. That is why Machiavelli would insist on a cold analysis, not a moral one. He wouldn't condemn the act just for the external impact, but for the internal disorganization it provokes. Because in the end, whoever loses governance over themselves loses much more than a relationship. They lose stability, clarity, and slowly, the very sensation of authority over their own life. There is a common misconception when treating this topic only as a warning or a condemnation. Machiavelli wouldn't end this analysis with guilt or fear. He would end with clarity, because for him, true power isn't in avoiding mistakes out of moralism, but in understanding the mechanisms that lead to them and reorganizing one's own position before the cost becomes irreversible. Infidelity, when observed with strategic coldness, isn't just a deviation. It is a signal. And signals exist to be read, not ignored. The first necessary reframe is abandoning the idea that fidelity is sustained only by promises or feelings. Machiavelli would teach that durable alliances require conscious maintenance. This means recognizing when a structure has started to fail and acting before the mind looks for external exits. The mistake isn't in feeling dissatisfaction. The mistake is in allowing it to transform into a silent justification. From a psychological standpoint, this demands something many avoid: internal responsibility, recognizing desires, frustrations, and changes without immediately translating them into actions. The body sends signals long before the mind admits it. Constant emotional fatigue, irritation without clear cause, and exaggerated need for validation. These signals aren't asking for an escape. They're asking for reorganization. Machiavelli would call this internal government. Another central point is understanding the role of position within the relationship. When a woman feels she has lost influence, recognition, or role clarity, the system goes off balance. The Machiavellian exit wouldn't be to seek validation outside, but to reposition inside. This might mean difficult conversations, redefining boundaries, or, in some cases, conscious decisions to end things, not impulsive ruptures disguised as freedom. There is also emotional discipline. In a culture that stimulates immediate reaction to any discomfort, maintaining internal control has become an almost subversive act. Machiavelli valued the capacity to contain impulses not out of repression, but out of strategy. Not every desire needs to be followed. Not every opportunity needs to be taken. Power lies in choosing when to act, not in reacting automatically. From a health perspective, this discipline has direct effects. It reduces chronic stress, stabilizes the nervous system, preserves vital energy. The body responds positively when the mind stops operating in duplicity. Internal clarity generates physiological coherence. Sleeping better, breathing better, occupying one's own space with less tension. These aren't side effects. They are indicators of alignment. Machiavelli would also warn about the importance of personal narrative. People who constantly see themselves as victims of contexts or emotions tend to repeat patterns. Rewriting one's own story, not as someone swept away by circumstances, but as someone who chooses consciously, changes everything. Identity stops being reactive and starts being strategic, and strategic identity is the foundation of long-term stability. This doesn't mean staying in relationships that no longer make sense. Quite the opposite. The difference is in the how. Decisions made with lucidity preserve internal integrity. Decisions made under emotional justifications tend to generate cycles. Machiavelli knew that leaving an alliance is also a form of power, provided it's done without duplicity, without hidden games, and without the need for external validation. The final point of this analysis isn't blind fidelity, but personal sovereignty. The woman who governs her own mind doesn't need to cheat to feel alive. She recognizes internal changes early, acts with clarity, and preserves her coherence. The body gives thanks. The mind stabilizes. And the relationships that remain start to exist by choice, not by inertia or escape. Machiavelli would sum this up simply and ruthlessly. Whoever does not govern their own impulses will be governed by them, or by whoever knows how to exploit them. The true advantage isn't in never making a mistake, but in not losing yourself in the process. When there is internal government, there is no need for betrayal. There is decision.